on Five Needle White Pines 2024-2025 Science and Management Webinar Series. I'm Enzo Martelli. I'm a PhD student in Karen Nelson's lab at the University of Montana, and I'm co-organizing this webinar with Lou Duluzzi, a PhD student in Daniel Ulrich lab at Montana State University, and Karina Lee, a master's student in Diana Tombach's Forest Ecology lab at CU Denver. We have a great presentation for today, and I'd like to start by introducing our recently elected chair, Glenda Scott, who will share a few words with us. Welcome, Glenda.
Hi, thanks, Enzo. And thanks, Karina, Lou, and Enzo for these wonderful seminars. We've had them for, I think, I'm going to say this is the fourth year. They've been very well attended and a great opportunity to share information. And just to give you a little, if you're unfamiliar or new to Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, this is a partnership we have with these university graduate and postdoc students. And among the many programs that we have, this is one of those for outreaching to researchers and managers, which I assume many of you are or interested publics, and we want you to be fully engaged in Whitebark Pine Foundation. A couple other things we do. We do a wonderful publication, Nutcracker Notes, which gives some recent research and management information. We have a student grant. Many of you have been recipients of that grant. You'll hear more about it next month, probably. And we have various programs to inform and involve the public, various conservation events, Skiria Partnership, the genomics sequencing project, that kind of stuff. And it's really exciting because of the listing by the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Endangered Species Act providing protection to whitebark pine and the opportunities. The time is now, is what I think, is we need to jump on this bandwagon. It's familiarity with folks and really take advantage. As well, we work with 5 other high elevation species: bristlecone, foxtail, limber pine, and which we'll hear more about today, and southwestern white pine. So how you can help, you can be a member. And with that, you can apply for the student grants. You will receive Nutcracker Notes timely, and we encourage you to be fully involved. And it helps support the programs that you may not be directly involved with, but that support the plight of whitebark pine and the other 5 needle pines. So Enzo has put the QR code there, so you can just scan that right away, or if you need to get on our website, please do. We have a pretty affordable membership, and that will go a long ways. We also want you to share the plight of whitebark pine and other species to your communities. And if the Whitebark Pine Foundation can be of help to spread that message, we would like to be involved. Get a hold of us through our website. Julie may be the one that answers the phone, but we involve all of our board members and other experts. So we can come out to your community or get people together, as well as we would like to have you involved with some of our committees to get some of our work done. So again, I encourage you to be a member, attend these seminars and the many other activities, and help share the plight of whitebark and the other high elevation species. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to say hello today. Get that QR code before you click off. Thanks, Sue. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Glenda. I'm going to leave this slide up for a minute before we start with Michael. A few final announcements. If you miss any of our previous installments, you can find the recordings of our talks in our YouTube channel, and the link to our website is already posted in the chat. And finally, after the presentation, we will have a QA session where you can share all your comments, doubts, and questions. Please post them on the chat box, and our team will be collecting them throughout it. For comments, we recommend you to give some context on the slides that you have a question about, or any part of the presentation that you're referring to make it easier for the presenters and us to follow up on it. All right, so I'll stop sharing this. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to now introduce today's speaker, Dr. Michael Murray. Dr. Murray is a forest pathologist for the British Columbia Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resources, and Rural Development in Nelson, and he's also our current membership coordinator. He received his PhD in Whitebark Pine Fire Ecology Forest Health from the University of Idaho, a master's degree in natural resources from Humboldt State University in Arcata, California, and he's also a professional agrologist. Michael's interests include whitebark pine dynamics and long-term monitoring, climate-driven tree declines, and ameliorating forest root diseases. And he's also, you probably not know about it, but he broadcasts his own radio show, Flashback 70s in Kootenai Co-op Radio, which is and where he streams Cosmic Country, Kung Fusion, Freakful, and more. And he's gonna be out tonight. So if you're interested, contact with us, and we're gonna send you a link. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me okay, Enzo?
Yeah,
Okay,
all good.
great. Super. Thanks, everybody. Definitely won't go a full hour. There'll be plenty of time for questions. And thanks for tuning in. Um, so I'm up in Canada. I've been lucky to be up here for, gosh, about 15, 16 years now. And so I'll share my perspective on what's happening up here as far as disturbances. Just I'd like to give just a little bit of background on distribution of our five needle pines. We only have two in Canada at high elevation five needle pines. In Western Canada, we do have Western white pine. Doesn't get up to high elevations here, but the other two do. So we'll talk about whitebark and limber pine. Okay, so the distribution of whitebark pine, you can see the international boundary down there. Most of the whitebark pine is in British Columbia. The vast majority actually is in British Columbia. The Continental Divide comes up and kind of bisects the Rocky Mountain distribution of whitebark pine. So we've got a bit in Alberta, but about 80% or more of whitebark is in BC. And it's going to be the inverse for limber pine, which I'll talk about in a moment. But what we have in BC is it's mostly associated with the Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir. And when we look at this is our systematic forest inventory that covers all forest types. Whitebark pine turns up mostly in Engelmann spruce, subalpine fir, our classification. We don't have a classification for a whitebark pine type. A little bit of a bias there, but that's the way it goes. So most of it is in what we call the Engelmann spruce subalpine fir biogeozone. In the higher elevations of cedar hemlock, we do have some whitebark pine, but that would be the lower elevations of whitebark. So a little bit of crossover, and the same with Doug fir. There's a little bit of crossover with whitebark, and in BC, we're generally talking elevations 5,000 to 8,000 feet above sea level for whitebark. Further north you go, of course, the lower they'll come down to 5,000 feet, up around Smithers and up there. So our communities that we have, variety of communities based on structure. We have those classic upper timberline Krumholz communities at the very upper elevation limits. We have subalpine woodlands, and then we have the mixed conifer forest, which tend to be lower elevations, where the canopies are often closed canopy. There's really no single whitebark pine ecosystem. It varies. There's quite a spectrum, and this is also reflected in whitebark pine's relationship with fire, and hydrology and wildlife, very different community types for whitebark pine. And same goes down there in the USA. Uh, we know it as a classic timberline tree species. It can form a forested ecosystem where otherwise we would just have meadow or bare ground. So this is notable. And like here's an example like of a dependent species. This would be like this is heartleaf arnica, and it doesn't like being out in the open, but it doesn't like closed canopy forests either. So it seems to do good in the filtered sunlight beneath the canopies of whitebark pine. And there's other species like wood rush and azalea that seem to show an affinity for these high elevation whitebark pine cover types. Uh, there's there's I have a school across the street from me, and there's like a big loud drum circle thing happening. It's a little distracting. Hopefully you can't hear it. Here is limber pine distribution. Now we can see that most of the limber pine, vast majority, is in the USA. But we do have a finger of limber coming up from Montana into Alberta, and most of it indeed in Canada is in Alberta, but we have a little bit in British Columbia as well on the west side of the Continental Divide. And so let's zoom in on the BC distribution here. We'll take a look, and so there are same forest cover plot system, and we see usually the limber pine, it's most associated with the Douglas fir type. It's a pretty dry Douglas fir type. This is nothing like coastal Douglas fir. Um, we've got like juniper in this Douglas fir type. But we also have it up in high elevations as well, up in the Engelmann spruce and the pure spruce, and just a little in the cedar hemlock. I'm not even putting a lot of faith in that identification there. 5 plots they found it in cedar hemlock. But one notable difference with whitebark pine is the elevation range. It has a really big elevation range, limber pine, from 2,600 up to 7,600 feet, where it does occur in the whitebark pine zone for sure. I should mention that limber pine is not on our endangered species list. Whitebark pine is federally declared endangered in Canada. Limber pine is not, although it has been recommended by a federal committee to be placed under our Species at Risk Act, but it is not there now. And different communities for limber pine. On the left, we've got a timberline community. In the middle is more of a mixed conifer where you'd find it with Doug fir and ponderosa pine and juniper. And then on the right, we've got these really interesting calcareous sites. They're usually pretty steep, but limber pine has a great affinity for these habitats. It's a poor competitor, so it gives it a good chance of thriving well there on these steep open sites. But they're really hard to get to and monitor them, and it's pretty common. This is commonly associated with the BC limber pine. Okay, so now we'll get into disturbance. So we can boil it down into 2 types of disturbance, biotic and abiotic. So when we talk about biotic, we're thinking about disease, insects, and people. Abiotic I'm thinking about weather, fire, landslides, avalanches. So what's going on in Canada? Most of us who are familiar with the five needle pines are aware of blister rust, so I won't spend a lot of time on blister rust. But as we can see from this publication, it is considered the most persistent and widely distributed threat. And when you see a photo like this is very common, this scene. On the left, we see trees that have been killed by rust. On the right, we see a tree that was recently killed by rust. And in the middle, this tree is undergoing an infection and it's got top kill already from blister rust. Airborne fungus kills all age classes. The disease is native to from Siberia across to Europe. And it's been here a long time now, over 100 years, but it still continues to kill old, mature whitebark pines. Sometimes it can take a while. It can take more than 10 years, probably even more than 20 years to kill some of these larger, older trees. So here's the distribution of the rust in BC, and you can see the international line towards the bottom there. There's Idaho and Montana's in the bottom right. And what we can see is as we go from west to east, there is more infection on trees. These plots were done by Randy Moody and myself. And then Parks Canada has their own set of plots, and which aren't shown here. But they're all in agreement, and that is the Continental Divide area and the Selkirk Mountains of the Kootenays are really the hardest hit by blister rust. And then if we look at the overall mortality, it seems to reflect this as well. So again, as we go eastward, we see greater mortality of whitebark pine. This is from all factors, not just blister rust. If we want to take a close look, like there's 4 long-term monitoring plots in the Nelson area where I live, which is just above the Idaho-Washington state line. We can see trends since 2003. So this is about 20 years. And we can see they're all declining except one, which is somewhat stable. That's the Puddingburn Mountain, where we went to on a field trip with our past conference when we were in Kimberly. But anyhow, this steep decline for Whitetail Mountain was mountain pine beetle, which brings us to a mention of the native mountain pine beetle. When I show this photo, people usually assume it's lodgepole pine, but no, this is whitebark pine. And this is Puddingburn Mountain, site of our conference field trip a few years back. Not only do we see mountain pine beetle, if you take a close look, you can see on the left is a clear cut. And that's a harvest. So this is another biotic factor. And then up at the top right, you can see a utility line coming through here. This is yet another form of impact on Canadian whitebark pine. Let's take a look at this. This is an insect. It is not mountain pine beetle. They don't typically attack the younger trees. this is pine engraver, and we see quite a lot of pine engraver up here. And one thing that you can seem to clue in on right away is it, it doesn't turn quite the same color as the mountain pine beetle. The engraver, the trees just seem to have a little more of an orange um, tone to them. And of course, they're going to be smaller trees. So here's a good example. Um, the pine engraver does attack mature trees as well. And actually, if you were on the field trip at Anthony Lakes, um, was that last month? Just last month for our annual Whitebark conference. We saw one tree that was the top was killed and it had been attacked by pine engraver down there. But I haven't seen a lot of pine engraver down in the US. Up up here in Canada, it seems to be a bigger deal. And one another way you can identify it is the frass. The frass on the bark is a lot finer than the frass you would see from mountain pine beetle. And it's usually the deposits are much smaller as well. So it takes a little bit more searching than your mountain pine beetle search. Not quite as obvious. And I guess I should mention as well, the pine engraver, I believe, is working in tandem with abiotic stress, and that is drought and high temperatures. Um, Otherwise, these engravers don't seem to be very successful. So I think it really needs these climatic stressors. All right, here is another scene which is not terribly uncommon in British Columbia. We do have timber harvest in whitebark pine, and I could give a whole talk on this, but I'll just try to boil it down. Whitebark pine can be legally harvested in British Columbia, even though it is declared federally endangered, and that is because of our federal legislation is not as strong as, for example, the Endangered Species Act in the USA. And it's basically up to the provinces to follow the recovery plans of the federal government. And we do have a recovery plan for whitebark pine. And without getting into much detail, the way the province follows the federal recovery strategy has not been challenged or tested. Okay. So we do have harvesting of whitebark pine. Now you can see in this photo, the timber company left retention. They left some whitebark pine retention. But the retention is very vulnerable to blowdown. It's what we call post-harvest shock. And there's a paper in the Journal of Forests that you can look up on this. Anyhow, whitebark pine is in the timber harvest land base, and I'll mention a little bit more in a bit on this. Whitebark pine is also threatened by successional replacement. Of course, this is happening in the US widespread, and you get its poor competitor. You get these spruce and fir, and they can just crowd it out. So without fire, as an example, whitebark pine can easily be crowded out with these less fire resistant species. Okay, here comes another disturbance. Some people are looking at this and thinking, what might this be? Well, this of course is this is Bigfoot. So in Canada, we've got a healthy Bigfoot population up here. And what they do is in the spring, they've eaten all their berries and they're really hungry. After winter, pretty hungry, um, pretty lean, pretty mean. They come out and they just tear these trees to shreds. What they do is they're licking up the sugary cambium layer in the spring. Okay, and that helps them. That helps them recover quickly in the spring. Um, did I say Bigfoot? I meant bear. Sorry about that. Um, Sometimes the misinformation comes out, but this is really bear, and we're seeing a lot of this in Canada. Um, and I don't recall seeing this in the USA, but um, perhaps some folks have. So I'd be interested in hearing where you might have seen that. Another thing the bears will do is they're going to climb some trees and um, they'll go up into the canopy and they will actually clip the cone-bearing branches off. They will just prune prune the tops of whitebark pine trees. And the few folks that I've talked to, I've talked to some wildlife people up here, and I've talked to a couple grizzly bear biologists, and they have actually observed the grizzly bears climbing whitebark pine trees, pruning off the branches, and the cubs. Sometimes the cubs go up, and the mama bear stays below and plucks the cones off the branches. But I think it works the other way around. So they kind of work as a family team and harvest these cones. But you can see there's a bit of damage to the tree. And so the damage would include a reduced capacity for producing cones. And this would be probably a neat research project for somebody to take on. And I'm not aware of this happening in the USA either. So I just wanted to bring this up. We're not sure exactly how widespread this is, but we've seen it in at least two mountain ranges in Canada. So it's not just like one bear, one crazy bear in one part of Canada doing this. Um, it's happening, but we need to learn more about this. So fire, certainly need to mention fire, and there's been a lot of fire research regarding white bark pine, but one thing that's really emerged in the last 10, 15 years is we're learning that white bark pine isn't as fire resistant as we have thought it to be. And even minor scorching can outright kill a white bark pine tree. The scorching you see here on the left is, I'd say, moderately severe. But even just a little bit of scorching, and it doesn't even have to be all the way around the bowl, can kill the white bark pine, and also the roots as well get damaged depending on the burn intensity. And I think our hot, dry summers are also contributing to the post-fire mortality as well. But a lot of really good emerging fire ecology work coming out. Another disturbance that we have in Canada is is fire management. So this is called a fire guard. In the USA, it's fire line, and these are they take the bulldozer, they tend to put these in on ridge lines. And that's, of course, where whitebark pine likes to live, on these ridge tops. So there's definitely an impact there. And here we have ski area. This is a new ski run going in, and we're seeing a lot of this in Canada every year. There's like a new ski run going in somewhere, and often those new ski runs happen in whitebark pine. Okay, so this is something that seems to be new to our knowledge. I don't know if anybody has seen this before, but I'd certainly like to know if you have. So what this is a weevil. Okay, and we just found this summer, and this is a whitebark pine tree, and we're finding them on dead and dying whitebark pine. We think it is a subalpine fir weevil, Soides striatulus. And we haven't gotten the DNA result back, but that's what we suspect. And this is not known to be a killer of whitebark pine. We didn't even think whitebark pine was a host, but now we're finding it. And it's something that we're just going to research more. And it ties into this, perhaps this slide, where Wang and Daniels, they did their study in Canada, and they're saying unprecedented reductions in snowpack, coupled with earlier spring melt and longer summer drought, are creating water deficit stress, along with the high temperatures. And thus, this can further exacerbate the decline of whitebark and limber pine due to the biotic agents, blister rust, the beetles, mistletoe, pine engraver. Um, the the climatic stress, it tends to decrease the mobility of the terpenes in these trees, which are the defensive compounds in the trees. Here's another disturbance that's happening in Canada. We have a lot of mining going on. And this mine, the photo on the left is the limber pine forest that we had, and that's the Kootenay River there. And this gypsum mine was put in recently, and took out a considerable number of the limber pine. And we have a lot of coal mining happening on in the Rocky Mountains, where whitebark pine is. So um, mining is definitely a factor. Now we have people in industry who are keen to minimize their impacts, um, but there's always room for improvement. Here's another recent project, our Highway 1, which is the Trans-Canada Highway. And it comes across from Alberta and drops down through Kicking Horse Canyon and Golden, BC. And there's a lot of limber pine in this. It's the Kicking Horse Canyon. It's one of our biggest populations in BC. And the highway was recently widened and rerouted, and a lot of limber pine are associated with the new construction that happened. And another impact we see in Canada, whitebark pine are so so high in elevation and so remote, yet we can still see civilization creep up into our whitebark pine, as you can see here in Banff. And then our communications infrastructure, um, we're seeing trees cut around that, even small trees like this. I'm not sure why these were cut. Um, so I don't want to be too much of a downer here. So I'd like to mention just a few things that we are doing on the positive side in Canada. So I want to mention the blister rust screening program. Again, going back to that earlier slide that stated blister rust is the most pervasive and widespread threat. So we're dealing with it. And we have a disease resistance program in Canada. And we have screened over 340 parent trees in our search for natural resistance. And this is patterned after the successful program in the USA, thanks to the US Forest Service for this. But you can see on the left, we've got the ribes leaves, the alternative host, and the spores of the blister rust drop down onto our seedlings. That's how we inoculate them. And then each seedling, of course, is tagged so we know the parent tree it came to. We can periodically check on these seedlings to see which survive and which don't, and track it back to the parents. And the same goes for our field trials, because you also have to have field trials. You can't just do this in a greenhouse. You have to have the real world conditions. So we're also testing them outside, and we plant them in these transects, and we come back and check on them. They're tagged, and we just come back and visit them every year. Doesn't always go as well as we hope, though. As you can see, here is one of our screening seedlings right here. This brings up yet another impact that I haven't mentioned, and that is cattle grazing. So it seems to be a bigger issue in Alberta than BC, especially with limber pine. But this is one of our rust screening trials near Manning Provincial Park in BC. And just a few more slides. I think one thing we really need in Canada is our provinces to take a critical review and determine if there's more that we can do to protect these trees. Alberta has a whitebark pine recovery plan, and in BC, we do have one. It's draft, but it's getting pretty close to being done in British Columbia. And I think once we get these recovery plans finalized, hopefully we can accelerate the recovery of whitebark pine. Not only recovery, but just the protection of what trees are out there. This is our parliament or our legislative building in Victoria, BC. So we need legislation as well. We don't have an Endangered Species Act for our province. And why is it important for our provinces to have this? Well, I should have mentioned earlier that we don't have much federal forests. The vast majority of our forests are owned by the province. We don't have a national forest system like in the USA. So all these slides you've seen, virtually all, are provincial land. That's where whitebark pine is. It's on the provincial land, unless you're a national park, which aren't very large. The vast majority of whitebark pine is on provincial forest land because there are no national forests. So some provincial legislation for endangered species could go a long way towards helping whitebark, limber, and of course, all the other species that are vulnerable and threatened. In the meantime, we continue to do a lot of planting. The Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation is really at the head of this, along with Parks Canada, doing a lot of planting of resistant whitebark pine and some limber pine as well. As far as timber harvest, there are some recommendations that have come out on how to successfully retain whitebark pine where harvests are occurring. Although this is strictly voluntary, there are timber harvest companies that are leaving whitebark pine standing in their harvests. But again, they are threatened to blow down. And so these guidelines are aimed at increasing the chances that those trees survive, like leave 8 neighbor trees around each whitebark, that sort of thing, just to increase the chances that they'll survive. And finally, I want to mention this excellent paper that came out, if you're not already aware, came out in 2022 in Forest Ecology and Management. And it's a really good catch-all and pretty comprehensive and a broad overview, but there are details and of course citations for more reading. And this Diana Tomback was the lead author of this one, and it's great. So just want to recommend this one. And that's going to be it. So thanks for tuning in, and can take a few questions. Hi, Enzo.
Thank you so much for your talk, Michael. Well, now I would like to open the opportunity for our attendants to share your doubts, comments, and questions with Michael. We have about 5 to 10 minutes. So please type your questions in the comment in the chat, and we'll take care of them. We already have a queue of something about 6 or 7 questions, so we can start with those if you're fine with that, Michael.
Yeah. Let's see, I go to the Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay, how many of the 340 parents that have been screened have come back as resistant? Great question. So this is an ongoing process. But so far it's looking like as far as percentage, maybe 10 to 15% of what we intake and test, we can actually say confidently is resistant. So we're looking at, I'd say 15%.
So we have a question from Jody Krakowski that mentioned in the chat that limber pine was listed as an endangered species in Alberta in 2008. How has the earlier listing of whitebark pine in Canada and limber pine in Alberta impact research?
How has the listing impacted research?
Yes.
That's the question. I don't think I haven't seen a big impact on research due to the listing. Yeah, I mean, I get a little money every year, but there's not a whole lot of whitebark pine researchers in Canada, actually. So if any Americans want to do some research, be happy to help point you in the right direction, like on like on the weevil, you know. You can do some, or the bears, there's definitely opportunities there. But as far as funding, I haven't seen an influx of funding due to the listing. We have seen the federal listing positively influence our restoration and our recovery efforts, like screening and planting of trees, for sure.
Thank you, Michael. The next question comes from Avery Hackett, and it says, "What forest products are produced from Whitebark pine in Canada, or that you know of?"
That's a good question too. Um, yeah, so it's not in demand as a wood product. It just it just winds up being harvested because it's with the spruce and fir. Okay, and the by far the predominant method of harvest is clear cutting in Canada. So I'm not aware of white bark being specifically targeted or used for any commercial purpose.
Yeah, I remember reading an
It's
article.
bycatch.
I
What's
remember
that?
reading an article from the. Yeah, I was saying that I remember reading an article from probably either early 90s or mid 80s that they were describing the strength capacities of Whitebark pine timber and that it was not structural recommended, so not necessarily a commercially targeted species. So yeah, I wouldn't expect it to make any other changes, maybe for non-timber products or something like that. Um, our next question comes from John Bangandi and is, do you find juniper communities or pine mat manzanita in whitebark and limber pine populations?
No, a pine mat manzanita is I haven't even seen it up here. Um, Unlike down in the States, it does occur in the subalpine, but juniper, yes, there is juniper with white bark pine up here. It's the common juniper, the creeping one. The I can't remember the Latin on it, but it's the more cespitous ground hugging one is with white bark pine and limber for sure.
So our next question is, do you have spruce budworm in Canada and have you seen it on whitebark pine? I have observed it on whitebark pine areas with severe infestation on Engelmann spruce.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we definitely have spruce budworm up here, and haven't seen it. Definitely haven't seen it on white bark pine though. But we are. It's definitely a big forest health agent in Canada. Yeah.
Interesting. From personal experience earlier this season working in central Idaho, in the Fairfield area, a group of co-workers and I found some signs of spruce buttworm affecting some whitebark pine regeneration, but not anything beyond that. Um,
Oh, interesting.
our next our next question is regarding your long-term monitoring plots. What other information has been collected there besides mortality or infection levels? Bob King has a long-term monitoring project in the U.S. Northern Rockies to measure the effects of mechanical cutting and prescribed burning for restoration purposes.
Yeah, so our long-term monitoring plots, they are the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation has its own methodology where they're often transects and they just look at whitebark pine. The provincial network uh, actually looks at all the tree species. So we're looking at like the subalpine fir and the spruce, and every tree gets a tag and we try to get back every 5 years. And we note all the forest health agents on all the trees, as well as the growth. We don't do the understory, but we do regeneration, tree regeneration in these plots. So they're a bit more comprehensive than the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation plots in that they take into account the other tree species, which just lends itself to more research. The basic white bark foundation transects are extremely useful, so I don't want to make any sort of disrespect on those.
It's really good to know like what's happening on the other side of the boundary as well. Then our next question comes from Kim Doms, and they say, should we add Bigfoot to the threat assessment for the amendment recovery strategy?
Should we add Bigfoot? Um, yeah, send some research money so we can learn a little bit more.
All right, next one. Um, can you let me see. Can you explain why the pine engraver tends to attack smaller age classes? Or,
No, I can't. I don't know. Yeah, because we got the mountain pine beetle that attacks the larger age classes. Although they've come down, they've been attacking smaller trees for sure. And I don't know. I'm not an entomologist, so yeah, the pine engraver. I mean, the pine engraver is a very tiny insect, and these smaller trees may become stressed more readily than the larger trees due to the climate. But I'm just speculating, so I can't really answer that.
thanks. Our next question says, regarding your detection of grazing effects and Whitebark recovery, earlier in your career, you addressed the issue of grazing impact on high elevation meadows. Have you seen a change or a trend to address these issues in the last years, or do you know a group that is working on this?
Grazing and impacts on whitebark
And
pines. So I'm not aware of anybody doing um, any research on this. And limber pine is also in a lot of grazing allotments as well. So if there is research, I would expect to see that come out of the US first. Um, the like grazing can be interesting, like grazing can be beneficial and an impact, just kind of like fire, they can both be good and bad depending on how it's done. So it's it's ripe for more research for sure.
absolutely, I completely agree. Similarly, as I was saying earlier, this season and in previous season as well as working in Central Idaho, we detected that in cattle allotments where there are like shepherd permissions and they have like hundreds and hundreds of sheep up there, there seems to be a quite drastic effect on regeneration levels. It's pretty much just kind of like a park with not a single seedling. Um, but yeah, that I'm not sure whether somebody's studying that as well.
Yeah.
Let's see. Um, Somebody's asking, have you seen damage from snowmobile users in these areas?
That's a good question. Like actually my rust greening field trials are in areas that get snowmobiles, and those little seedlings are quite vulnerable. But no, I haven't seen any impacts or heard of any impacts myself, and it hasn't been identified in our threat assessments that we've gone through with our rare species specialists and all the technical experts. That has never come up, snowmobiling as a threat. So I couldn't say.
Interesting. Well, those are all the questions that we received so far, but if we do receive more, we'll send them over to you. And I wanted to say it in behalf of the Wild Pine Ecosystem Foundation and also our webinar organization team. Thank you very much for just joining us and your participation. And I want to tell the rest of our attendants that our next webinar will be this December 17th with Christine Waring presenting her work on interdisciplinary research in southwestern white pine, highlights and management implications. Thanks again, everybody, for attending and stay tuned for our upcoming installments. And thank you again, Michael, and see you all next month.
Thanks, everybody.